From being implicated in corruption to being accused of rape and even murder, the actions of some of our police officers have brought the South African Police Service's recruitment process into sharp focus. The latest case to cast the spotlight on the department involves former Tembisa Constable Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu. Ndlovu is currently standing trial for allegedly killing 6 people to cash out on insurance claims. So just what vetting process do our police officers undergo when they are recruited? Let's ask Eldred De Klerk. He's a policing expert and a senior associate of the African Center for Security and Intelligence Practices. Eldred, thank you so much for joining us. Our police officers, they are armed with guns. They are given power to arrest. They've got serious responsibilities. Are they given thorough psychological assessment that goes with some of this power that they receive?
Hi, Tapuman. Thank you for the question, because we do have to ask, is the current duty of care of the South African Police Service to ensure that their members are fit for duty, both physically and mentally? Is the regime vigorous enough? Yes, indeed, there is psychometric testing at the beginning of an officer's career as a candidate police officer. And then the question is, how often and what kind of support remains in place beyond the 24 to 21 months after they actually become full police officers? And this is where we have a problem. We may also look at what has happened with this particular constable and say, is she the exception? Is she the one person, despite the testing and despite the support, has slipped through and has now been accused essentially of being a serial killer? And is she the exception insofar as that she's a psychopath? Psychopaths are smart and they are able to buck the system until, unfortunately, they get caught out.
So just how helpful then would psychometric testing be? For example, in instances where you have a psychopath who is able to evade such tests easily, would they be able to accurately root out the bad apples?
Well, it depends on what's been tested. There are a battery of cognitive tests, and then there's a battery of personality tests. It's a regime that supports the testing, and that is where your field training officer, your mentors, your commanders, all of them have a role to ensure that they do daily assessments of every officer, that there's a culture and a process of officers being able to put their hand up and request and say that I need help, that I'm not coping, and that there's also an ongoing invitation to officers, not only just to present themselves, for fellow officers to say, hold on, I've been observing Eldred. Eldred, can I have a chat with you? Your microaggression, what your choices seem are questionable, and I would suggest that you need help. Can I accompany you in getting that help? So there's been this culture of big boys don't cry. There's been a culture that is too insular. And there's been a culture within the South African Police Service that doesn't really lend itself to officers actually saying that they need help. So it's beyond it's the psychometric testing and everything else that supports that.
Would it be helpful then to, for example, ensure that there's constant testing and constant help given to the officers, whether they ask or not, because they are facing lots of stresses on the job, and even though maybe we tested you in the beginning and you were fine, you've dealt with so much and you've changed, you need the help, maybe you don't even realize it.
Absolutely. Testing and debriefing, psychosocial debriefing and support needs to be mandatory. In fact, it needs to be part of the performance agreement and part of the responsibility and duty of care of the South African Police Service, that every commander ensures that the men and women under his or her command and under his supervision is actually cared for. So debriefing and psychosocial support indeed should be mandatory.
Should the age limit for officers be increased, Eldred? Is an 18-year-old who comes into the force prepared for the stresses of the job and some of the responsibilities that they get?
Absolutely. When we were discussing the Firearms Act and for you said police officers are armed, there was a very interesting study that came from the Red Cross Hospital in Cape Town that found that most South Africans, or most people worldwide, is at age 25, especially the boy child, we still extended adolescence. So an officer can have a very fruitful career if they join the South African Police Service at the age of 25, they have a mandatory service period or a limited service period of 20 years. They leave the South African Police Service mature and able to go on to a second or a third or even a fourth career. That's the problem with the South African Police Service. You join at 80 and you expect to leave at 60, and you're fearful of your career, that there's nothing else that you can do beyond being a South African Police Service officer. So indeed, I've always been an advocate that we should not be recruiting an 18-year-old and arming him or her with a gun in a club. We're far too immature. I know what I was like at 18, and maybe we should be setting the recruitment age at about 25. Officers even join at 30 and 40 in other police services and have a very fruitful career of 15 to 20 years or even 25 years. They're mature, they're able to deal with the rigors of life, and they understand that when they need assistance that they'll ask for it.
Well, Eldred, thank you so much for that insight. You've just reminded me of what I was like when I was 18, and I definitely should not have been handed any kind of responsibility. Thank you so much. That's Eldred De Klerk. He's a policing expert and a senior associate of the African Center for Security and Intelligence Practices. Some interesting insight that he's given us there.
Can you imagine being 18 and given a gun?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, it's a huge responsibility, and sometimes maybe they don't even know what they're doing wrong.
Exactly.